Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome a European-Canadian writer, entrepreneur, dancer, and world traveler. She's worked in film. She's owned a Pilates studio where she's trained celebrities and athletes. She has a fashion blog called Style on the Side. She's the author of 2 books, including her latest, Your Roots Cast a Shadow. Please help me welcome Caroline Topperman. Caroline, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
We have a lot to cover because everything I read about you is fascinating. But I want to start by going back with you. So you were born in Sweden. And so I wonder, what was your family life like, and in particular with regard to Judaism?
So I was born in Sweden because my parents inadvertently became political refugees because my mom's family, this is a part of the history that I think people don't know so much about, and it's unfortunate because I think it's important. My grandparents, my mom's parents, that's the Jewish side of my family. Mm-hmm. They were kicked out in the anti-Zionist purges of 1968 in Poland. Yeah, my grandfather, my mom's father, was a fairly prominent minister in the government, and he was actually one of the first 3 ministers that were kicked out of the government. When I was doing research, I actually found the New York Times covered it. So this was international news, and so my mom at the time was studying in Paris. And so she couldn't go back. Her parents said, like, if you come back, you will probably be arrested. Wow. Her brother was arrested. And at the time, my parents were married, but my father was working in Iraq as a geotechnical engineer. And so they couldn't.
Incredible. I was reading that. That's incredible. All this stuff.
Wow. You know, it's a lot, right? Yeah.
So you didn't grow up with like any sense of Judaism in your house really that much?
We did, but it was in a cultural way. It was always like that. Like from the youngest age, we always celebrated Hanukkah. I actually went to Hebrew school in Toronto. It was a good not like a good kindergarten, sorry. And so it was a Hebrew kindergarten. So I started learning Hebrew when I was little. So that was always there. I mean, and I grew up in Thornhill, which is a very Jewish part of Toronto. We celebrated Passover. So all of that, yes. But it wasn't, it was always a secular household. And I think it's because that my dad wasn't Jewish. Right. Although if we had questions, we would go to my dad because he usually knew more about Judaism than anybody else in the house.
So your mom could not be in Sweden. I want to go back to that a second. So they could not be in Sweden at the time at all? Poland. I'm sorry. Yes.
Poland. And then so what happened is my family got out. So my grandparents left. And my parents, at this point, they were living in France, and they decided to join my mom's family in Sweden, and that's how everybody wound up in Sweden. But actually, there were a lot of Jews at that time who went through Sweden on their way to Israel or the U.S. or Canada or somewhere else in the world.
I was going to ask you, so how come Sweden? Why they pick that place?
So at the time you weren't allowed when you were leaving. Jews, when they were leaving, they were basically, their passports were being taken away and they were given travel papers. So the assumption is that you are not coming back. You're not allowed to come back. I don't know that Poland was allowed to do this, but that's how it was. You weren't supposed to come back, and the only country that would technically take them was Israel. But not everybody wanted to go for different reasons. Everybody had their had their own reasons for where they wanted to go. My grandfather at the time was in love with this very pure form of communism,
Right.
and he wanted to go to Yugoslavia. So glad he didn't. But that was sort of what he wanted to do, and the only way to do that was to be able to go through Sweden, because they would have to go to the embassies or consulates and plea their cases to get into other countries. But Sweden's like the known refuge for people, because they were always neutral, they took a lot of people. My husband, for example, who's not Jewish either, when his family was fleeing Poland, when Poland was still behind the Iron Curtain, they went through Sweden as well, because it's the proximity is very close, and it was an easy country to get through. So a lot of people made their way through Sweden.
Incredibly fascinating, all this stuff. All right, I'll come back to this. Let's go back to you for a little bit there too. I mean, all right, let's go back to your childhood and everything too. So you have books out. You're a writer. I see all this thing. So I want to know, as a kid, were you a big reader also?
Oh yeah. I actually have. As I was doing research for the book, I found a letter that my mom wrote to my grandmother saying that, like, thank goodness my grades aren't suffering yet, but all I do is read. So yeah, that was like from an early age. That's all I did.
Favorite books?
So there are a few, and obviously they changed as I grew up, but I loved Judy Blume when I was little. Those were like the books that really captured my imagination. And of course, like, strange, just because of how we grew up in our history and everything. I write about this, but like Sally J. Friedman as herself, I love that book. I read that book over and over again, and it was about, a Jewish girl figuring out what happened to her family, and because we grew up with so many holes in the family, that was sort of this. I must have, like, on some weird subconscious level, completely connected with it.
How about writing? You were a writer as well?
Yeah, and I got my first rejection when I was 8 years old for Owl magazine. I sent them a little booklet, and it was a very nice rejection. I actually think I still have it somewhere. But yeah, that was my very first one. And then
What did they say?
I did this whole thing about how different means of travel, and then the last one I picked was a horse, but it was like planes, cars, and like I'm rejecting all of them, and then it was like going on a horse, like environmental, ahead of my time, and they were like, well, it doesn't fit.
Wow. But how old were you when you first moved to Canada, and what prompted you to move there?
So, well, Canada was my parents. I had nothing to do with it. I was like 3 or 4 when we came here. So I have like my very, very faint memories of it. And it was because my uncle, my mother's brother, he wasn't happy in Sweden. And, he was like off to make his fortune somewhere, and he picked Canada. And my parents were trying to figure out where to go. I know my dad was pulling for Italy. My mom's thinking maybe California, but I think it was an easy choice for them because they could get sponsored. He was already establishing himself here, and they weren't going into a complete void, because at this point, my parents had already lived in Baghdad for a little bit. They had lived in Paris. They had lived in Sweden. And I unconfirmed, but my guess is they were just probably really tired, and they had me now. They could land.
There's so many fun things I saw in your life and on your website.
Sorry.
You started dancing at the age of 3, and you went on to dance professionally. So what was your routine dancing so young? Was it something that you wanted to do, pushed you into?
No, I wanted to. When I was younger, I wanted to. I loved it. But I wasn't, like, let's be clear, I wasn't some great prima ballerina, phenomenal dancer. I was pretty good. But I really liked it. And then actually when I was in my teens, my mother didn't want me to do that anymore. I don't know that she basically said, you'll never be a dancer, so you should, maybe it's time to quit. And then I did for a few years, but I missed it a lot. And then actually after she died, I went back to it. And that's when when I went back to it a little more seriously. And that's when I got to perform and do everything. But it was because, it was more like, it was part therapy, I think, at that point too.
So you dance professionally. Where did you dance professionally at?
So I danced. I danced with a couple of companies here and there. I didn't like dance. I sort of freelanced, I guess you could say, but I was with Omo, which is a company in Toronto. They're no longer. I performed with Kokoro, which is a company in Vancouver, and so it was just like here and there, doing different performances, different shows.
I want to talk about your Pilates studio because I love this in the intro that you were the owner and you had many celebrities and professional athletes as clients. So tell me about the studio itself, and I want to know who are some of the clients.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I love Pilates. That was fun. I started because when I moved to Vancouver, so I started because I had a really bad dance injury. I tore my hamstring, couldn't sit straight. And so I started it. It helped me. It was something I took to really well because of the kind of movements. I really enjoyed it. Moved to Vancouver. I'm starting my life from scratch here. I don't have anything. So I basically walked into a gym and I said, "Hey, can I get a job?" And they gave me one. I'm not really sure why, but they gave me a job. And so a friend of mine who was a trainer there, he said, "Do you want to start teaching Pilates?" Because I was certified to be a trainer. And I said, "Sure." Mm-hmm. And then I sort of built it up that way. I built my everything up that way. And someone at some point put me on a list. I don't know how to get on these lists. I don't know who did it, but someone put me on a list. So what happens is when celebrities come into town, they get a list of like available trainers that they can work with, apparently. This was the case. And so the very first person that I trained who's like a big recognizable name is Penelope Cruz. I only trained her a handful of times, but it was fun. She told me, this is my claim to fame, is she told me I was the first person who ever taught her how to do sit-ups properly. I'm hanging on to that one forever.
You get a plaque for that?
I really need one. The other person who I really loved was Danielle Savory. She was on a show, Station 8, a firefighting show for quite a while. And she's done quite a few things. She was fantastic. And I trained her when she wasn't on that show yet. They were filming the first season of some musical show. She was still she turned 19 while I was training her, and I know that because I was invited to her 19th birthday. So she was fantastic. I'm kind of watching her career now, which is amazing. And then just because of Vancouver, the way Vancouver is, there are NHL and other athletes walking around the streets more so than anywhere else. Really, it's weird. Maybe because it's so small. And so just naturally, where my studio was in West Vancouver, it was natural, and it was just through the other clients that I had that they sort of heard about my studio, and they came there to train. So it was a lot of fun. I'm
sure. Do you get that you're supposed to be teaching these people who are celebrities? Do you get starstruck at all? Oh my gosh, I'm teaching Penelope Cruz, or I'm teaching this one.
No, I've never been that way. I think there are some people that I would probably have like if Baryshnikov walked into my studio, I would have heart palpitations, hands down. But with all of them, I think it's just because, it was kind of neat because it's I knew more about this one thing than they did.
Right. Okay.
And so we were on equal terms for that.
That's really cool. All right.
Which was really, it didn't feel like I had to fawn over them.
No, that's fantastic. I love that you had that experience. I also want to ask now, okay, you've been to so many countries. I mean, just even talking to this little thing, but on your site, you make it sound like you've been to so many other places too, so that you travel. I've traveled a lot too, but I think as a kid growing up, I moved a lot from country to country. I think you've probably been to more than me. So what has that done for you? I'm just getting to see so many different cultures. What has that done for you? For your thoughts, your writing in general?
I mean, obviously huge impact because so how it really was with my family is I like to say my mom was the first Airbnb-er out there before that became a thing because we would go with my grandparents lived in Germany. They lived in Frankfurt when I was young, and we would go every other summer basically and visit them. And from there we'd take a road trip, as you can do in Europe, to a different country. And what we would do is we'd get somewhere and my mother would be like, okay, I don't want to, we didn't have money at all. So there were no hotel, the option of a hotel was just off the table. And so we would go and we would find a local real estate agent and we'd say, hey, we're here for a month or whatever. Can you please find us a place? Sorry. Sorry.
Bless you.
Excuse me. And so because of that, we weren't separated from the locals. We lived with people. We went grocery shopping at the normal grocery stores.
Right.
And so I think it just taught me that I'm not better. I'm not staying at a hotel. We're not on this fancy vacation. We're just like the locals living there. And that was, I think it was that kind of immersion that made a huge impact because we had no choice but to at least learn some basics in whatever language we were experiencing, and we had no choice but to integrate. We couldn't really be apart from them.
So you just went to like a country and just like got a house for the month and just regularly.
You could do that. Way back when you could do that. And, we would live like in a complex. So I remember one year, this was 1 year in Italy. I love this place. And I don't know how they found it, but it was like these little apartments right on the canal. So everybody's like patio went out onto the canal. So while we were there were boats that were parked there. So we met a couple who had just sailed in from the US or just sailed in from somewhere else, and they were parked there. And they were these like tiny little apartments joined together. And local people live there. So we just kind of had to be part of that.
It's so incredibly cool. I mean that. It's like, all right, I want to hear about your blog also, because I went on your blog, this style on the side. You have a lot of fun pieces in there. So just tell me about the blog itself so people can check it out.
Sure. I really need to update that. I started this like 15 years ago, and it was just starting to be like the biggest, hottest thing. And I had a lot of fun doing it because in two of the many jobs that I've had, I did work in fashion a little bit, and then I worked at a beauty counter too. So I know my way around.
I'm going to say, I'm not sure that there's a place that you haven't worked in based on your site.
I had a moment in my life of like not saying no to anything, so I just did it all. And then I really like that. And actually for me, it was a really good way to merge writing with just something fun that I could do. Mm-hmm. And then obviously with the fitness, because I really legitimately did have a big background in fitness, I could also merge that in, and sort of this health and wellness aspect of it came in as well. But as a bonus, that's what got me a column in HuffPost Canada, writing. We called it the True North Fitness Guide, and that got me a column. So great. You
didn't have to apply. They saw your blog and said, "Hey, would you like to write for us?"
So there was like a group that you could get into where they would pull from your blog, like fashion tips or something from your blog, and then that segment was closing, but I had already sort of weaseled my way in, or been nice to the editor, and she liked that she didn't have to do a lot of editing on my work. And so I said, hey, is there an opportunity to continue something? And she said, yeah, sure. Hey, why don't you do this? And that's how I got it. So it pays to ask, right?
Of course. That's fantastic. I'm going to get to the book in a moment, but okay. So one of the things you said, you have to update your blog. You do, because before we started recording. So I asked, because I thought you still lived in Poland. You said you don't anymore. Okay, you're back in Toronto. So I want to know, though, you did live in Poland for a while. Where did you live, and what made you decide to live there for a little bit? Going back now as an adult, I mean.
Yeah, we were living, so my husband and I had moved to Vancouver for his work. Okay. And he was working at Electronic Arts, making video games, and so but then he quit. Like he changed jobs, and I was working for a real estate developer at the time. This was right after I had closed my studio, and Vancouver, it was like 2009, and I don't know, economy was tanking. Vancouver's, it's a great place. It's a hard place to live because it's so expensive. And so we took a trip to Poland. In 2011, we took a trip to Poland, and it was his first time being back since he left. And the only time I had been before was once after my mother passed away in 95. My dad took us, my sister and me, to show us where we were from. And so we went to Warsaw, we traveled around a little bit, and I don't know, something clicked, and I was like, I feel so much better here. I love Vancouver, so nobody yell at me for saying this, but it's a really big sports town. And it felt like it wasn't feeding my soul, is what I say, because for me, it's the arts. I want to be able to go to galleries and see things in architecture and just experience that. And I didn't love it. I was having a hard time. And so I thought, okay, what if we sell almost everything we own and just move to Poland and see what happens? Because we could afford to live there for a little bit, just on savings because it's cheaper there. And my husband was getting burnt out at work too. And I don't know, he went for it. Maybe enough threats from me. It took me a year and a half to get our passports because we thought, let's go live, let's actually live there. And so, yeah, we landed in Warsaw. That was the home base because that's where we both have family and big city. And so, yeah, November, I think it was November 13th or 14th, 2013. We landed in Warsaw, Poland to start a new adventure. No jobs, nothing. Because, and my theory was, what's the worst that can happen is after, a few months or a year, we come back, tail between the legs, kind of move in with family for a little bit. And that didn't happen. But, I was like, what's the worst that can happen? We hate it and we come back. Fine.
Kind of a great experience. And now I'm curious though, how were things now for Jews there? I mean, because I always hear conflicting things over there now. So how do you find it? So,
yeah, I've gotten I had a couple of people be very accusatory at me that we even thought to do this. So, when I was there in 1995,
yeah.
The thing that I remember, one of the things that I remember is walking by a brick wall with, and there was a graffiti of a hangman with a star on it. Yeah. And that was, I kind of expected to see that. But it's changed. It's not like that. And I was there recently now, and it's completely different. Yeah, I think the anti-Semitism, it's there. Some of it is really sort of so deep rooted that it's not people aren't even thinking that what they're saying isn't cool, that this is, that it's anti-Semitic or it's right now there are people that are actually really fighting to bring back the history and just to make it visible. The Poland Museum is the history of Jews in Poland. The Holocaust part is really small in that museum, and it really talks about the history of Jews. It is phenomenal. And it's a big museum, and they have a loud voice. When you go now on the streets, you see they're plaques that are embedded in the sidewalk of the Warsaw Ghetto. There are signs on the street now. They're following what a lot of other European countries are doing, and there'll be plaques on buildings that say this is who lived here, this is what happened here. They have the Isaac Bashevis Singer festival every year now. When we went in 2011, when I wanted to go visit the synagogue just to see it, They barely let us in. The guy demanded we hand over our passports. But now it's more like the other European synagogues in other cities where you can't go in. I mean, you're walking in next to a guy with like a huge gun, and you're walking through a metal detector, but it's like all the other ones. And so there are a lot of people working to change that. And then also there's the Jewish Historic Institute, and they actually own all the history of Jews, the Warsaw Ghetto, and all of that. And they actually, when I was there recently, the lady that I was talking to, the genealogist, was furious because the Holocaust Museum in DC had, I think they did something with the records, and she was furious because she's like, we own this. And so there are a lot of people reclaiming that and reclaiming that voice. And if you go right this minute, it will be, I mean, let's put it this way, Toronto feels a lot more hostile than Warsaw did, even though, some areas weren't great, but right. It's a lot more hostile. So it's not bad.
I could see that now. For sure. All right, so let's talk about your book, Your Roots Cast a Shadow. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So it's actually really interesting. It's changed since I first wrote it. What prompted me to write it originally was the fact that when we showed up there, I started really walking in the footsteps of my parents and grandparents and seeing things that they had talked about and seen. And I was sort of conscious of all this now. And at this point, I sat down to finally read my grandfather's unpublished manuscript, which is actually at Stanford in their archives. And I sat down, I was like, wow, this is history that a lot of people don't know. My grandparents survived the Holocaust in Uzbekistan. That's a very small percentage of Jews that went further east and not west, or not to South America or North America or somewhere else. And so I thought, this is just a really fascinating story. And then when we came back, so I started working on it. It was one version of the book. I wasn't so happy with it. Didn't go so well. And then actually what happened is then Putin invaded Ukraine. And because my grandparents were from Lviv, which is now Lviv. It was Poland before, but now it's Ukraine. And I started seeing headlines in the newspapers, and I felt like they were literally ripping off my book. Even though that was Russia versus Ukraine, the story, the headlines were the same. And I thought, this is something these are stories from this part of the world that need to be told. These are stories that people need to hear about because we don't hear about them. And, we have a lot of the Jewish story with concentration camps, which, horrific. And of course, those stories need to be told. But I think there's so much more that happened. And there's this one, I saw that this was recently, but there were these stats that I saw that if after the war, there's a select few pogroms that happened. Right. And then this 1968 purge, if that hadn't happened, they're estimating that right now in Poland, there'd probably be about 400,000 Jews. Right? And so all of these things started to scare me when we were in Poland, we could see these nationalists or fascists or neo-Nazis, whoever, with their armbands, walking down the street doing marches, and no one said anything. No one would say anything. No one fought them. They were allowed there. I participated in a couple of their pride parades. And the first pride parade I participated in, we were flanked by 2 rows of cops in full riot gear with about 12 huge police vans following behind. And I thought, it doesn't it's the same people who are trying to silence people. And we say that we're the Jews were the canaries in the coal mine. So I think it's that effect that I noticed, is that it at this point it didn't matter, because they hated all of us, right? Everybody who wasn't like in that nuclear family and perfect, and so I saw that and I thought, oh, we have to be talking about this, and I'm going to lend my voice to this if I can.
So, I mean, you have some really good stories about your grandparents in there as well in the book. You mentioned already that, like your grandfather was in the Communist Party there too and had to flee when the Nazis came. So what do you know of his life prior to the Nazis invading? I mean,
well, thank goodness he wrote a book,
right.
because I wouldn't have known much. I mean, he was an engineer too, so let's be clear. This book is very factual, or very linear in the way he writes it. Very boring. But I managed to catch little glimpses, but he was always an activist. My mom's father was always doing things like he would actually he would defend his, like, he had a lot of Jewish friends that went to the local Jewish schools, and he would go and defend them, and he actually would go and hang out with them a lot, even though his family was more secular. But he grew up like that. He knew Hebrew growing up. They spoke Yiddish. I mean, all of that. And then he ran an underground press in the 1930s. Him and his friends were running it, and had they been caught, they would have been jailed for sure, and they probably would have gone to one of the political camps. So he did a lot of that. That's why I say, like, he loved communism in that, like, truest sense of what it is, that shared economy, I guess. And he did that. As the war broke out, they were still there because the Nazis weren't there yet, and it was lesser of two evils, living under Russian occupation at the time. And so that's when he helped rebuild the city, and that's what he loved to do. He was very outspoken. He was active in political rallies. They were part of the artists, the whole, like, intelligentsia kind of the scene. Both my parents, and that's what they did, and they were well traveled. His family, his father was a teacher, so my grandfather spoke several languages growing up, and yeah, that's before their world completely crashed.
Well, okay, there are so many. You touched upon a little bit there too in Poland, because there were so many stories back then about Poles collaborating with the Nazis in regard to their Jews. How did they find that time when they went back, I guess, afterwards?
So my grandfather, he died. He didn't really go back, and most of his friends had already moved on. Most of my grandparents' friends didn't live there anymore. My grandmother went back in 95 after my mother died, and other than that, they lived in Germany. The whole family, like that whole side of the family, basically left. Germany was giving reparations after the war. Poland did not, and in 1968, when they left, that was it. I mean, that was their homeland. So they had their feelings for their homeland,
Sure.
But they never dealt with it the way I could expect to talk about it properly in that way, because they never really went back.
Just fascinating. All the things that I read about, you and your experiences and the family's experience was really just incredible. So I mean, I definitely recommend everyone get the book. So I do want to shift gears a little bit too, because I thought, like, we said, you've worked in everything, it looks like to me. So your bio talks about the script doctoring on an internationally award-winning film. What film?
I don't remember what it was called. He won this. I was like back in university. This is 100 years ago. I have a VHS of the film. It was a short, and I walked him through it. It was a really nice guy, and it won some awards in he won some big award in Barcelona, and then he won something in New York as well on this film, and it was so random.
Well, and you worked on an award-winning film. You should know this. You should have to.
I know, I really
this is like should be a badge of honor for you. So
no one's ever asked me this question before. It's in but the film is in a box somewhere like back here, actually. So.
well, okay. Well, you worked on several films as well. So I wanted. Do you know what films you worked on with them and what you did for them?
So I did. So I actually had a really fun time when I was in high school. This is how I started. When I was in high school, I went and did one of those. In a high school you can go and they send you off to work things to try out different jobs. So I worked for the Canadian Film Centre, and I worked on this one film with Nev Campbell. There's the name for you. It was called Ruskin. I will never forget that one. And this was before she had all these clauses in her thing that no nudity or anything like that. And because I was this young kid on the film set, I got to go hang out and see all these things, and the director would let me watch and everything. So that was really fun. And one of the guys from Kids in the Hall was on it too in that movie. And these were shorts. And then there was another one, and I don't remember the name of this one too. But it was still when a lot of the AIDS epidemic was being talked about, and it was a film that I was working on, and hilariously, I was in the movie because they needed male prostitutes in the movie, and what they wanted were trans prostitutes actually. So but they couldn't afford to get heels that were big enough for men because they were just too expensive. It didn't fit the budget. So they asked a bunch of us. I guess they scrapped that idea and they just asked a bunch of us. So my legs are with a fake tattoo that an artist drew a fake tattoo on my ankle. I'm in that too.
What film? So
I can't remember the name. I'm sorry. I don't know if it went anywhere, right? Because James Cameron, I think he's still attached to it. I think he still runs it. But they would go, potential filmmakers would go there and they would do shorts. Okay. And that's how that whole center worked.
Everyone watching this is going to want to go look for your leg in the tattoo now. So.
Okay, it's a tattoo of it's a dollar bill with wings on my ankle.
Okay, so let's go on to something. What are you working on next?
So I actually have a bunch of projects, no surprise. One of the things that I've recently, it's something that's been marinating a little bit that I recently wanted to resurrect. It's can I do 3 steps back? Sorry, terrible interviewee here. So I'm actually working on a second book. It's called The Road to Tangigaru, and it's a book that came out from writing the first one because while I was writing the first one, I think my dad's family got really jealous that I wasn't writing about them, and everybody started giving me things. And then my dad's brother actually in 2019 gave me a binder with 38 pages that my grandfather had written, my dad's father, nice. Wow. About his time building the road from Kabul to Jalalabad. And
that's unbelievable also. Yes, that's great.
Because my dad was born just before World War II, and so the whole family basically fled to Afghanistan, and then the borders closed. They couldn't go back to Poland, and so my dad spent his formative years there. So I grew up hearing all these stories about Afghanistan. I always felt like I was part of the Afghan community, even though it seriously was not. But the food and all of that, traditional rugs, I have one hanging in my living room from my dad, and so. What happened is I found what I think is the only Farsi Polish dictionary in existence that my grandfather created for the family, and about a dozen or so Afghan folk tales. So while I started working on this, I was like, okay, I need someone who can look at these folktales and just tell me what they are, a little bit about them. And because they're all in Polish, so I had to first translate them, the whole story. And through Penn Canada, I met an Afghan scholar who's living in Canada in exile. And so he started helping me, just explaining the history of some of the characters, the point of some of these stories. And through him, I was introduced to the Daricha School, which is a school for I think it's primarily women, but they're boys attended as well. It's an underground school in Afghanistan. You can find it on the internet, which is why I'm saying it. And so I offered to teach writing and just to sit and talk with them, even just to conversational English. And so that's what I do. And through that, I met some really amazing people. One of the students, she now works for the school, but she was a student there. While she was living in Afghanistan, the Taliban showed up at her door, and she couldn't go back. She had to flee. She's now in Pakistan. We're working on getting her and her family to Canada. But, sorry, very long-winded point. I had this idea that I wanted to start an online magazine. It's called Migrations Review. And I wanted to sort of amplify those voices and not worry about how phenomenal the writing is or the English even, but just to have their voices heard. Because these are people who are literally being silenced, right? They're not allowed to speak outside. So I'm sort of, as I'm writing this next book, I'm sort of also working on how to resurrect this and to be able to let people who are either living in exile or people who are who are being silenced, how to help get their stories out.
Oh, fantastic. Good for you. And
very long-winded answer.
No. And how can people follow you on social media?
I mean, I'm so easy to find. Caroline Topperman. That's pretty much, you Google it, that's me. So Instagram is my big one, but I'm there.
An important question, because I saw this. I don't know if this part of the website was updated or not, that you hadn't yet made it through a whole thing of pumpkin spice latte. So I want to know, have you made it yet?
No, 2 sips and I'm out. I'm sorry, can't do it. I don't know. I don't understand it. Can't do it.
I'm with you on that one. I don't see the appeal, but it's a big thing. Well, Carol, I want to thank you for coming on today. It's such a pleasure getting to talk to you. I'm sorry. I apologize for all the technical difficulties we had, but thank you. And again, the book is Your Roots Cast a Shadow. I will put the graphic here, but here it is also. So, and again, thank you. But let me sign this off. So again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. Again, a very special thanks to Caroline Topperman. The book is Your Roots Cast a Shadow. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.